"That cleaning lady will never set foot in my mansion again," shouted the wife of a millionaire as she threw an elderly cleaning lady out of their mansion. Sometime later, an unexpected visitor revealed something that left everyone in shock. The Montemar mansion shone under the golden lights of the gala party taking place that night. Crystals reflected the glow of antique chandeliers, while champagne glasses clinked in the hands of elegantly dressed guests. In the center of the main hall, Vanessa, a woman of stunning beauty, with black hair that cascaded down her exposed back in a red dress, circulated among the guests. Her amber eyes concealed the coldness of her heart, while her calculated smile enchanted everyone. She was the young wife of Richard, the mansion's owner and respected businessman, a man with graying hair and elegant posture who, despite his advanced age, maintained an imposing bearing and penetrating gaze. Vanessa observed her husband from afar, absorbed in her own thoughts while her fingers played distractedly with the gleaming diamond on her ring finger. "This party is just the beginning. Soon everything that is his will be mine, and I can finally live the life I always deserved," thought Vanessa, as her gaze discreetly crossed with Tyler's, the family's driver, who was serving drinks on the opposite side of the hall. Away from the spotlight of the party, in the back corridors of the mansion, Eleanor, a woman with grey hair tied in a simple bun and hands marked by decades of hard work, walked hurriedly. Her steps were silent on the luxurious carpet, a skill acquired in 25 years working as a cleaner for the family. Dressed in her grey uniform, she moved like a shadow, almost invisible to guests who would never notice her presence. That night, while music and laughter echoed through the main hall, Eleanor was looking for cleaning products to solve a small accident in the kitchen. Confused by the new organization of the cabinets, she opened the wrong door and entered Richard's private office, a room forbidden to employees without express authorization. Holy Mother, where did they put that disinfectant? The party has barely started and they've already spilled wine on the new carpet, Eleanor muttered to herself, as her eyes adjusted to the dimness of the office. What Eleanor saw upon entering the office made her heart almost stop. There, on the solid mahogany desk, where Richard usually signed his important contracts, were Vanessa and Tyler entwined in a passionate kiss. The hands of the young driver, with his athletic physique and seductive smile, roamed the mistress's body shamelessly, while she, with disheveled hair and cheeks flushed from alcohol, laughed softly. Eleanor remained paralyzed, her breath suspended in absolute shock. A toppled champagne glass stained important documents, and the skirt of Vanessa's dress was indecently raised. The cleaner tried to retreat silently, but her elbow bumped into a picture frame that fell with a dull thud onto the carpet. The sound, though muffled by the distant music, was enough to alert the couple. Vanessa turned abruptly, her wide eyes meeting Eleanor's. "What are you doing here, you meddling old woman? How dare you spy?" hissed Vanessa, quickly adjusting her dress as her face transformed from surprise to calculated fury. Eleanor felt the blood freeze in her veins. Her years of loyalty to the family, especially to Richard, who had always treated her with respect, contrasted violently with the scene she had just witnessed. Her wrinkled hands visibly trembled as she took a step back, leaning against the closed door. Fear spread through her body like poison. It wasn't just the fear of losing the job that supported her and paid for her high blood pressure and arthritis medications, but also the horror of seeing betrayal happening under the roof of the man who blindly trusted his young wife. Tyler, for his part, maintained an impassive, almost arrogant expression, his dark eyes fixed on Eleanor like a predator evaluating its prey. "Please, ma'am, I need this job for my medicine." "I didn't see anything, I swear by the Virgin of Guadalupe," pleaded Eleanor, her voice breaking in desperation as tears began to form in her tired eyes. In the 3 days that followed, Eleanor lived in constant anxiety. Each time she crossed paths with Vanessa through the corridors of the mansion, she felt the weight of the mistress's threatening gaze upon her. The cleaner redoubled her efforts in her tasks, arriving earlier and leaving later, hoping that her dedication might compensate for the terrible secret she now carried. But Vanessa was not willing to take risks. One afternoon, during a private meeting with Tyler in the back garden, away from curious eyes, she plotted her macabre plan. Her thin fingers played with a strand of hair as she spoke in a low, calculated tone, her beauty masking the coldness of her intentions. We need to get rid of that nosy old woman before she opens her mouth. I already have everything planned for our escape, but she could ruin everything, said Vanessa, her eyes shining with a mixture of malice and determination that would make any sensible person back away. On the fourth night after the incident, when the mansion was silent and most of the staff had already retired, Vanessa put her plan into action. With feline steps, she entered her husband's room, who was sleeping deeply after taking his insomnia medication. Carefully, she opened the drawer of the antique dresser, where Richard kept his most valuable possessions. Among them gleamed the gold watch that had belonged to his father, a rare piece of inestimable value, both financial and sentimental. Vanessa took it, feeling its considerable weight in the palm of her hand, and hid it inside the pocket of her silk robe. With the same silent care, she headed to the staff dressing room. She knew the house routine well, and knew that at this hour the place would be empty. She easily located Eleanor's simple and worn bag, hanging on one of the hooks identified with small labels. "This will teach that busybody to keep her nose out of my business," Vanessa muttered to herself as she slipped the watch into the cleaner's bag. The following night, during the formal dinner Richard was hosting for some important partners, Vanessa implemented the second part of her plan. She looked stunning in a midnight blue dress that contrasted with her fair skin and enhanced her golden eyes. She watched attentively when her husband, in the middle of the meal, raised his jacket sleeve to check the time, only to discover that his wrist was bare. The confused expression on Richard's face was the signal she had been waiting for. With the skill of a consummate actress, Vanessa leaned toward her husband, her voice a perfect mixture of concern and calculated hesitation. "Darling, I've noticed objects disappearing. Your gold watch is gone, and it's not the first time," she said, delicately placing her hand on her husband's arm while her eyes feigned uneasiness. The dinner proceeded with apparent normality, but Vanessa could feel Richard's growing concern. When the guests finally left, she continued her performance, appearing increasingly disturbed. As they walked to the bedroom, Richard, a fair man who had always treated his employees with dignity, showed visible reluctance to the idea that Vanessa was subtly planting in his mind. His face, marked by years but still attractive, contracted into lines of worry as he pondered the possibility that someone he trusted was stealing from his home. "I hate to suspect those who take care of our home, but I've noticed small objects disappearing for weeks. Perhaps we should check," suggested Vanessa with false hesitation, while her perfectly manicured nails caressed her husband's arm in a studied gesture of comfort. The next morning, pressured by his wife's insistence and genuinely concerned about the disappearance of an object of such sentimental value, Richard made the difficult decision to request an inspection among the staff. With a heavy heart, he gathered everyone in the grand entrance hall. Eleanor was among them, her eyes downcast and worried, but her conscience clear. Never in all her years of service had she taken even a pin that did not belong to her. Vanessa remained at her husband's side, her expression a perfect mask of sadness and disappointment, while Tyler observed from a distance, maintaining his professional posture that revealed not the slightest hint of complicity in the plan. "I deeply regret having to do this, but an object of great personal value has disappeared, and I need to ask that everyone allow their bags and belongings to be checked," announced Richard, his grave tone demonstrating how much the situation displeased him. One by one, the employees voluntarily opened their bags and backpacks. When it was Eleanor's turn, she handed over her worn leather bag with the confidence of someone who has nothing to hide. The butler designated for the verification opened the worn clasp, and to everyone's horror, especially Eleanor's, there was Richard's gold watch, gleaming in contrast to the simple and organized interior of the bag. A collective murmur of surprise ran through the hall, while Eleanor's eyes widened in shock and disbelief. Her wrinkled face instantly paled, and her mouth opened in a silent scream of denial. "It wasn't me, Mr. Richard, it's a setup. Your wife hides dark secrets that would destroy you," exclaimed Eleanor, her fragile body trembling like a leaf while pointing an accusing finger at Vanessa. Vanessa wasted no time capitalizing on the moment. Like a consummate actress, she let perfect tears run down her flushed cheeks, delicately staining her expensive makeup in a spectacle of emotional devastation. Her delicate shoulders shook with seemingly uncontrollable sobs as she clung to her husband's arm for support. Her voice choked with fake crying, rose in a lament that echoed off the marble walls of the imposing hall. The other employees observed the scene in sepulchral silence, some confused, others shocked, no one daring to interfere in the drama unfolding before them. "This maid will never set foot in my mansion again. After so many years, she stabs us in the back," shouted Vanessa, her voice oscillating between theatrical sobs while her nails dug into Richard's arm. Richard found himself divided between the incontestable evidence before him and 25 years of loyal service. His face, normally confident and decisive, now showed a mixture of confusion, disappointment, and even shame for having to deal with such a situation. He looked deeply into Eleanor's eyes, as if seeking in them the truth that his heart refused to accept. The maid held his gaze, genuine tears of injustice and despair flowing freely down her wrinkled cheeks. But the presence of the clock in her bag was a fact that could not be ignored, and the wild accusations she made against Vanessa seemed only to confirm her guilt in everyone's eyes. "Eleanor, we have worked together for many years, and this makes this situation even more painful. Out of respect for this time, I will not call the authorities, but I must ask you to leave my house immediately," Richard finally said, his tone firm but laden with genuine regret. Eleanor, devastated and humiliated, gathered her few belongings under the accusing and curious gazes of the other employees. No one dared to defend the elderly woman, fearing for their own jobs in such difficult times. With trembling legs and a broken heart, she crossed the grand gate of the Montemar mansion for the last time. As if in a cruel final blow from fate, the sky opened in a sudden storm as soon as she stepped onto the street. The heavy rain fell mercilessly on her fragile body, mixing with the tears of injustice that wouldn't stop flowing. With her clothes quickly soaked and her grey hair clinging to her face, Eleanor stopped at a certain distance, turning to contemplate one last time the mansion that had been her workplace for more than 2 decades. "The truth always comes to light, like water that cannot be held in hands," Eleanor murmured to herself, as she pressed against her chest the small medal of the Virgin that she always carried with her. Inside the mansion, Vanessa observed the scene through the living room window, a triumphant smile playing on her perfectly outlined lips. She felt a presence behind her and recognized Tyler's masculine cologne. Without taking her eyes off the solitary figure of Eleanor being punished by the rain, she allowed a malicious smile to form completely on her face. Leaning slightly backward, she felt the warmth of Tyler's body close to hers, though he maintained a professionally appropriate distance in case someone entered the room. 3 days and we'll be free forever," whispered Vanessa, as her golden eyes shone with the promise of a new life built on her husband's fortune and the disgrace of an innocent. Weeks passed like an eternity for Eleanor. Sitting at the small, worn wooden table that occupied the center of her living room, she contemplated the empty bottle of high blood pressure medication. The humble house in the outskirts, with its peeling walls and ceiling that leaked on rainy days, seemed even more desolate now. The faded curtains filtered the weak afternoon light, projecting ghostly shadows across the cramped room. On the wall, a yellowed photo showed a younger Eleanor next to her late husband. She passed her trembling fingers across her forehead, feeling the pressure pulsing at her temples. Since her unjust dismissal, every penny saved over the years had been directed toward basic necessities: food, water, electricity. The medications, too expensive for her current budget, had become a luxury she could no longer afford. The silence of the house was interrupted only by the insistent ticking of the old clock on the wall and the distant sounds of the neighborhood. How could I have been so naive? I worked honestly my entire life, and now my name is stained by a lie, murmured Eleanor, as a solitary tear ran down her wrinkled face. If only there was some way to prove my innocence. The sound of soft knocks on the door startled Eleanor. She stood up with difficulty, her aching joints protesting with each movement. Opening the door, her tired eyes met Martha's familiar face. The former cook of the Montemar mansion was a robust woman, with calloused hands and a welcoming smile. Her black hair with grey streaks was tied in a simple bun, and her dark eyes, always expressive, reflected genuine concern. She carried a basket covered with a colourful cloth, from which emanated an aroma that made Eleanor's stomach growl involuntarily. She hadn't realized until that moment that she had barely eaten that day. Martha entered without ceremony, placing the basket on the table and embracing her friend tightly. The familiarity of the gesture brought a wave of comfort that almost made Eleanor collapse in tears again. "I came as soon as I could escape from my duties at the new house where I work. I brought hot food and some money I managed to save," said Martha, taking containers with homemade meals and a small envelope from the basket. "It's not much, but it should help with the medicine. I still can't believe what they did to you after so many years of dedication." And the small living room transformed into a confessional when the two women sat down, sharing the simple meal Martha had brought. The aroma of meat and vegetable stew filled the room, bringing brief solace to Eleanor. Between slow forkfuls, she finally found the courage to reveal what had really happened on that fateful night at the Montemar mansion. The words flowed like a dammed river that finally finds its course, while Martha listened with increasingly widened eyes. Eleanor described in detail the scene she had witnessed in the office, Vanessa's threat, and how she suspected the watch had been planted in her purse. Her fingers trembled around the water glass, recalling the public humiliation she had suffered in front of all the staff. "Vanessa and the driver. They're planning to run away with Richard's money. He was always good to me. I can't allow them to destroy him," concluded Eleanor, her eyes gaining a gleam of determination that contrasted with her fragile appearance. "That man may have believed that viper, but he always treated me with dignity. He doesn't deserve to be robbed and betrayed like this." Martha remained silent for a few moments, processing everything she had just heard. Her face transitioned between expressions of indignation and prudence. Finally, sighing deeply, she adjusted herself in the chair and leaned forward, lowering her voice as if the walls could listen. The evening light entered obliquely through the window, creating a play of shadows on the former cook's face, accentuating the lines of concern on her forehead. Her robust hands, witnesses to years of hard work in the mansion's kitchen, gestured cautiously as she carefully chose her words. "Who would believe us against that elegant viper?" questioned Martha, her voice laden with bitter realism. "She has everything in her favor: youth, beauty, wealth through marriage. And us? We're just disposable employees in their eyes, worthless when we no longer serve." The night advanced as the two women discussed the situation in low voices, as if conspiring against forces much greater than themselves. Outside, the distant sound of dogs barking and children playing in the streets of the periphery created a contrast with the seriousness of the conversation taking place in the small room. Martha carefully observed the changes in Eleanor's countenance, the gradual transformation from despair to something more dangerous: determination. The experienced former cook knew that mansion and its secrets well, the habits of its residents, the security flaws, the dark corners where indiscreet conversations happened. Her inside knowledge could be valuable, but they would need more. An ally who still worked there, someone with direct access to the traitors. Suddenly, her eyes lit up with an idea that was beginning to take shape in her mind. "Let's bring justice before they destroy other lives," exclaimed Martha, lightly tapping the table with the palm of her hand. "I know someone who can help us unmask those two. Jake, the gardener, has always been loyal to Richard since the boss paid for his daughter's treatment years ago. If anyone would take risks for him, it would be Jake." The next morning, with the first rays of sun still timid on the horizon, Martha headed to a small cafe near the Montemar mansion. She knew Jake usually had his breakfast there before starting his work in the extensive gardens of the property. The modest establishment, with its formica tables and faded posters on the walls, mainly served workers from the region. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the smell of fresh bread, creating a welcoming atmosphere for the early morning customers. Martha chose a discreet spot at the back, from where she could observe the entrance without being immediately noticed. She didn't have to wait long. Jake appeared punctually, as was his custom, wearing simple clothes and carrying a small backpack with his personal belongings. He was a middle-aged man, with skin tanned from outdoor work and calloused hands that revealed years of dedication to the gardener's craft. "Jake, I need just a few minutes of your time," whispered Martha, approaching cautiously after he had placed his order. "It's about something serious happening at the mansion, something that involves Mr. Richard and that wife of his." The conversation with Jake was tense and full of hesitation. The gardener, initially reluctant to get involved in matters that could cost him his job, listened with a grave expression as Martha narrated the events, from the false accusation against Eleanor to the suspicions about Vanessa and Tyler's plan. Jake kept his eyes fixed on his coffee cup, as if seeking answers in the dark liquid. His angular face, marked by the sun of countless days working in the gardens, contracted with signs of worry and doubt. He knew well the nooks and crannies of the mansion, everyone's routines, and had recently noticed suspicious behaviors from Vanessa and the driver, looks and touches that seemed inappropriate when they believed they weren't being observed. "I can't deny that I also suspected something between them," Jake finally admitted, lowering his voice even more. "Last week, while I was pruning roses near the gazebo, I saw the two in a very intimate conversation. They stopped abruptly when they noticed my presence. And afterward, I found this fallen on the grass." The small electronic device that Martha handed to Jake seemed insignificant in his large, calloused hands. It was a discreet recorder, the size of a matchbox, with simple buttons and a small indicator light. The gardener turned it over several times, examining the object with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. They were sitting on a park bench far away, far from curious ears. The afternoon sun cast long shadows of tree branches over them, creating a dancing pattern on the concrete ground. Around them, children played and elderly people fed pigeons, completely oblivious to the conspiracy unfolding just a few meters away. Martha explained in detail how the small device worked, where to press to record, how to hide it, the battery duration. "We need evidence or no one will believe," Martha emphasized, her eyes reflecting the seriousness of the situation. "This recorder is small enough to fit in your shirt pocket or even under your watch. You need to capture Tyler confessing their plan." The days that followed were an exercise in patience and strategy for Jake. The gardener, always discreet and efficient in his work, now carefully observed every movement Tyler made around the property. The recorder remained hidden in his pocket, ready to be activated at any opportune moment. He noticed that the driver spent more time than necessary near the master bedroom when Richard wasn't around, and that he frequently exchanged complicit glances with Vanessa during meals. The tension grew with each passing day, as Jake knew that any slip could cost not only his job, but also the only chance for justice for Eleanor and to save Richard from a cruel fate. Loyalty to the boss who had saved his daughter years ago fueled his determination, even when fear threatened to make him give up. "I need to approach him in some natural way, gain his trust without raising suspicions," Jake thought, while meticulously trimming the plants in the Japanese garden. Perhaps a social occasion, something that lowers his defenses and loosens his tongue. The opportunity arose almost a week later, when Richard announced he would be taking a business trip for 2 days. As soon as the car taking the boss to the airport disappeared through the property gates, Jake noticed a subtle change in the atmosphere of the mansion. Vanessa seemed more relaxed, giving orders with an even more pronounced superiority, while Tyler circulated around the house with an inappropriate familiarity for an employee. That night, after completing his tasks, Jake saw Tyler heading to the small staff quarters at the back of the property. It was a simple but comfortable building, where some employees who didn't have their own residence in the city rested between shifts. With a sudden decision, Jake grabbed 2 bottles of cold beer that he kept in his small refrigerator and casually walked toward the quarters. "Mistresses always have their secrets, don't they?" Jake commented carelessly, after several minutes of small talk, offering a second beer to Tyler, who was already finishing his first. "I've worked in mansions like this for over 20 years, and if walls could talk..." The night advanced, as empty bottles accumulated on the small table between them. Jake, pretending to be as intoxicated as his target, encouraged Tyler to keep talking, asking seemingly innocent questions that fed the driver's ego. The recorder, discreetly activated in his shirt pocket, captured every word. The simple room in the staff quarters, illuminated only by a bedside lamp, created an intimate atmosphere that encouraged confidences. Shadows danced on the walls when Tyler leaned forward, pronouncing increasingly slurred and indiscreet words. His eyes, normally calculating and cold, now shone with the effect of alcohol and the excitement of talking about his grandiose plans. "That old woman doesn't know that soon I'll be in the Bahamas with her mistress and millions of dollars," Tyler boasted, his tongue loosened by alcohol and the false camaraderie that Jake had skillfully built. "The idiot thinks she controls everything, but she's just a stepping stone on my path to wealth. Vanessa thinks we're in love, that we'll live happily ever after with the old man's money. Little does she know that as soon as we have the money, I'll go my own way. The first rays of sun were already appearing on the horizon when Jake, with cautious steps not to wake the other staff members who were sleeping, silently left the quarters. His heart was racing in his chest, a mixture of triumph and anxiety. The small recorder in his pocket, now containing Tyler's complete confession, seemed to weigh a ton. Without wasting time, he headed to a small cafe on the corner, away from the watchful eyes of the mansion, where he had arranged to meet Martha. The former cook was already waiting for him, her anxious eyes constantly examining the entrance of the establishment. When Jake entered and gave a discreet nod, Martha's face lit up with renewed hope. "Did you get it?" she asked in a low voice, leaning over the worn table as Jake sat across from her. "Did he confess everything?" The faint light of dawn entered through the gaps in the worn curtains in Eleanor's small living room. The elderly woman was sitting in her favorite armchair, her face tense with expectation, as Martha and Jake arrived hurriedly. The deep wrinkles on her forehead seemed momentarily softened by the hope that gleamed in her tired eyes. Her trembling hands held a cup of tea that had gone cold long ago, forgotten in the tension of the moment. The small recorder passed from hand to hand with the care that would be devoted to a precious relic. When Martha finally pressed the play button, the voices filled the silent environment. Tyler's unmistakable drunken voice revealing every sordid detail of the plan that he and Vanessa had devised. With each word that emanated from the small device, Eleanor's face transitioned between shock, validation, and finally, a fierce determination that seemed to rejuvenate her features. "We did it! Now we have the evidence to unmask that viper," exclaimed Martha, squeezing Eleanor's hands between hers with renewed enthusiasm. "We can go directly to Richard with this." The phone on the kitchen wall rang shrilly, breaking the moment of celebration. Eleanor stood up with difficulty, her joints protesting with every movement, and answered with a hesitant voice. On the other end of the line, a familiar voice spoke quickly, conveying information that made the old woman's eyes widen more and more. Her free hand squeezed the phone cord with increasing force as she nodded repeatedly, although her interlocutor couldn't see her. The sun now fully entered through the windows, illuminating the suspended dust in the air and projecting Eleanor's profile on the opposite wall, a fragile but erect silhouette, as if a new strength sustained her. When she finally hung up, she turned to Martha and Jake, her face reflecting an urgency that wasn't there moments before. "Richard has returned from his trip, and Vanessa is organizing a family dinner for tonight," Eleanor reported, her voice gaining firmness with each word. She told the staff they will announce a long trip. "It's our only chance." The Montemar mansion shone like a jewel in the night, each illuminated window projecting golden rectangles onto the meticulously maintained garden. In the spacious dining room, where the crystal chandelier reflected thousands of points of light onto the polished mahogany table, the family gathered for what Richard had announced as a special occasion. The patriarch, recently arrived from his business trip, occupied the head of the table with the elegant posture that had always characterized him. His impeccably tailored suit contrasted with his slightly travel-worn features, but his eyes shone with a genuine expectation that moved everyone. By his side, Vanessa radiated in an emerald silk dress that enhanced her beauty and youth. To any unsuspecting observer, she would be the perfect image of a happy and dedicated wife, with her dazzling smile and the careful attention with which she served a glass of wine to her husband. Only the slight tremor in her fingers and the excessively feverish gleam in her gaze betrayed the inner torment consuming her. "Dear family members, I thank you all for your presence on this special night," Richard began, raising his glass in a toast that captured everyone's attention. "Vanessa and I have an announcement we wish to share with you, something I planned with great care during my absence." At the opposite end of the city, a taxi worn by age and constant use stopped in front of the imposing entrance of the Montemar mansion. Eleanor descended with difficulty, her painful joints protesting with each movement. She wore her best clothes, a simple but dignified outfit she kept for special occasions, though she had never imagined wearing it in such dramatic circumstances. The dark blue fabric, slightly faded by time, still maintained the discreet elegance that had always characterized her. At her side, Martha and Jake flanked her like guardians, their faces reflecting the same silent determination. The small bag Eleanor clutched to her chest contained much more than the recorder. It carried the truth that could restore her dignity and save a good man from devastating betrayal. The front garden, which she had so often tended with dedication during her decades of service, seemed to welcome her with the gentle perfume of roses she herself had planted years ago. "I don't know if I have the strength to face all of them," Eleanor murmured, hesitating momentarily before the steps leading to the main entrance. "But the truth cannot wait, even if it costs me what little dignity I have left." Inside the mansion, oblivious to the storm approaching his door, Richard continued his speech with growing enthusiasm. His eyes, marked by years but still penetrating, shone with a genuine joy he hadn't shown in a long time. Vanessa maintained a frozen smile on her perfectly outlined lips, while her thoughts ran uncontrolled, alternating between the escape plan with Tyler and the immediate need to keep up appearances before the gathered family. The jewels adorning her neck and wrists, expensive gifts from Richard over the years, seemed to weigh tons, constantly reminding her of what she was about to steal. In a discreet corner of the room, Tyler remained standing, in his usual professional posture, serving drinks to guests with impeccable efficiency. Only the brief eye contact he occasionally exchanged with Vanessa revealed the complicity that united them in their treacherous plan. "After so many years of dedication to business, I've decided it's time to prioritize what truly matters," Richard continued, lovingly taking Vanessa's hand in his. "Therefore, I announce that in a few days, we will depart for a paradise island where we will renew our marriage vows in an intimate ceremony, just the two of us, reconnecting as at the beginning of our love." The sound of the doorbell echoed through the mansion, interrupting the solemn moment. Those present exchanged confused glances, wondering who could be arriving at that hour and on such an intimate occasion. Richard frowned, equally surprised. Tyler, the driver, made a motion to head for the door, but Richard, with a slight gesture of his hand, stopped him. Something about that interruption seemed to demand his personal attention. With natural elegance, he briefly excused himself to the guests and walked down the marble corridor toward the main entrance. His steps resonated in the sudden silence that had settled in the room, as if everyone sensed that this interruption was no mere coincidence. The solid wooden door opened with a soft creak, revealing the unlikely figure of Eleanor, erect and dignified despite the obvious nervousness in her trembling hands. For a moment, shock paralyzed Richard's normally composed features. "What are you doing here, Eleanor?" he asked, the surprise in his voice mixed with an indefinable note. Perhaps curiosity, perhaps the intuition that this unexpected visit carried something important. "I thought our paths had separated definitively." Eleanor's response came loaded with a dignity that surprised even herself. The days of humiliation and despair had forged in her a determination that now emerged in her posture and in her voice. The fragile and supplicant woman who had been expelled under the rain weeks ago gave way to a presence imbued with moral purpose. Her eyes, normally lowered in respect, now stared directly at those of her former employer, without arrogance but with the firmness of someone carrying an indisputable truth. By her side, Martha and Jake remained in respectful silence, their presence serving as silent testimony to the seriousness of the situation. "I've come to bring the truth that you deserve, even if it's the last thing I do," Eleanor replied, her voice clear enough to be heard by everyone who now curiously gathered in the entrance hall, attracted by the commotion. Before Richard could respond, Vanessa emerged from the dining room, her face a mask of barely contained fury. Each step she took toward the front door seemed calculated to intimidate, the high heel of her shoes shattering the silence with dry cracks against the marble. Her beauty, normally radiant, now had something threatening about it, like a storm about to break. The red lips contorted into an expression of contempt while her eyes, cold as ice, fixed on Eleanor's figure with undisguised hatred. Upon recognizing Martha and Jake beside the former housekeeper, her expression darkened even more, instantly understanding that she faced not just an isolated accusation, but an orchestrated conspiracy against her plans. The jewels on her neck gleamed in the hall light, as if silently mocking her facade about to crumble. "I said this housekeeper would never set foot in my mansion again." "Get this old woman out of here," shouted Vanessa, her authoritative tone disguising the growing panic she was beginning to feel. How dare you show up at a private family meeting? Haven't you caused enough trouble with your theft?" A tense silence settled in the mansion's hall, each breath seeming to echo against the ornate walls. The family members, initially surprised by the interruption, now observed the scene with growing curiosity, forming an involuntary semicircle around the protagonists of that unexpected drama. Tyler, who had discreetly approached, kept himself at a strategic distance, his face a mask of professionalism that barely disguised the tension in his shoulders. Richard remained motionless between his wife and his former employee, his countenance reflecting the confusion of a man who feels he is about to witness a devastating revelation. It was at this critical moment that Eleanor stepped forward, her physical frailty dramatically contrasting with the moral strength emanating from her posture. Her eyes, which had known so many sorrows in recent days, now shone with the clarity of purpose that only truth can confer. "The mansion is not yours, madam, and soon you won't even have dignity," Eleanor replied, her voice gaining firmness with each word. "What I have to say concerns everyone present, especially Mr. Richard, who always treated me with respect unlike others." Eleanor's gesture in opening her small purse had a deliberate, almost ceremonial slowness. Each movement of her wrinkled fingers seemed laden with meaning, as if she were untying not just the clasp of the purse, but also the knots of lies that had been woven around her. From inside the worn accessory, she extracted the small recorder that Jake had obtained with such effort. The object, seemingly insignificant in her trembling hand, contained the power to destroy reputations and unmask betrayals. A collective sigh ran through the audience when Eleanor raised the device, her finger deliberately resting on the play button. The look she cast at Vanessa at that moment contained not vengeance but the serene certainty of one who can finally restore the truth. "Before you accuse me of theft again, Mrs. Vanessa, I would like everyone to hear what your accomplice has to say when he believes he is among friends," declared Eleanor, pressing the recorder button with quiet determination. Tyler's unmistakable but intoxicated voice filled the mansion's hall, each word resonating with devastating clarity in the absolute silence that had settled. The recording began with casual conversation, but quickly evolved into shocking revelations. The clandestine affair with Vanessa, the meticulous plan to steal millions from Richard during the supposed romantic trip, the carefully orchestrated trap to incriminate Eleanor for the theft of the watch. Even more disturbing was Tyler's confession about his true intentions with Vanessa, using her only as a means to reach the fortune and then abandoning her, taking most of the money with him. With each new revelation, the faces of those present transitioned from shock to indignation. Tyler himself, paralyzed near the staircase, visibly paled, his arrogant posture crumbling with each second the recording continued. But it was on Richard's face that the deepest transformation occurred. Initial disbelief giving way to such visceral pain that it seemed to age him several years in a matter of minutes. "That old idiot thinks we're planning to renew vows. Little does he know we'll be thousands of miles away with all the money we can transfer," said Tyler's recorded voice, followed by a cruel laugh. "And as for Vanessa, she's just a convenient stepping stone on my ladder to wealth. When the money is secure, I'll go my own way." Color completely abandoned Vanessa's face, leaving her with a ghostly pallor that made her red lipstick look like an open wound on her porcelain face. Her eyes, wide with horror, moved frantically between the recorder, Tyler, and her husband, like a cornered animal seeking a non-existent escape route. Her hands, always so elegant and controlled, now trembled violently, and the diamond necklace on her neck seemed to suffocate her. With growing desperation, she lunged toward Eleanor, trying to snatch the recorder from her hands, but Richard, emerging from his initial shock, stepped between them with a silent authority that immediately stopped Vanessa. His expression, normally gentle, had transformed into a mask of ice, his eyes reflecting an explosive mixture of disappointment, anger, and pain. "It's all lies. He was drunk, fantasizing things," Vanessa shouted, her voice rising to a hysterical tone they had never witnessed in her. "You can't believe the words of a drunken employee and a resentful maid who stole from this house." Vanessa's attempt to reverse the situation fell flat. The evidence was irrefutable, her own reaction only confirming the truthfulness of the accusations. Each desperate denial sounded like another confession to everyone's ears. Tyler, realizing the game was over, tried to discreetly exit toward the back of the mansion, but two of Richard's cousins quickly blocked his path, their looks making it clear there was no escape. The driver, suddenly stripped of his usual arrogance, seemed diminished, almost pathetic in his evident defeat. In the center of the hall, Richard remained silent, processing the magnitude of the betrayal he had just discovered. Years of trust, generosity, and affection reduced to nothing. Plans for a shared future revealed as an elaborate farce. When he finally spoke, his voice carried an authority that immediately silenced everyone present. "Was everything I gave not enough for your ambition?" Richard asked, each word pronounced with painful precision, as if extracted from the depths of his wounded soul. "I entrusted you with my life, my heart, my future, and you planned to steal not just my money, but also my dignity." The silence that followed Richard's question weighed like lead in the mansion's air. Each breath, each minimal movement seemed amplified in that moment of absolute truth. Vanessa, cornered by the irrefutable evidence and the accusing gaze of everyone present, quickly moved from panic to anger, and finally to a kind of desperate frenzy. Her behavior, always so carefully calculated and elegant, disintegrated before everyone. The emerald dress, symbol of her studied sophistication, now seemed merely an ill-fitting costume for an actress whose performance had been unmasked. Her perfectly arranged hair began to come loose, strands falling over her contorted face, in an expression that oscillated between fury and despair. It was as if, for the first time since she had entered that house, the true Vanessa emerged. Not the dedicated and loving wife, but the calculating opportunist who had seen in Richard merely a means to achieve wealth and status. "You don't understand. He never really loved me," Vanessa shouted, her voice rising to a hysterical tone that reverberated off the mansion's walls. "It was always work, business, responsibilities. I was just another acquisition, a trophy to display at dinners and parties." The transformation in Richard's countenance was gradual but inexorable. The initial pain and shock now gave way to something more definitive, a silent resolution, the final understanding that what had been broken could never be repaired. With deliberately slow, almost solemn movements, he stood up completely. His posture, always dignified, now seemed coated with an authority that emanated not only from his social position, but from his moral integrity. Eyes that minutes before had shone with affection and expectation while announcing the surprise trip, now looked at Vanessa with a coldness that seemed to pierce the young woman's very soul. The family members observed in respectful silence, witnessing the moment when Richard reclaimed not only his house and fortune, but mainly his dignity. "Leave my house now before I call the police." "Exactly as you did with Eleanor," declared Richard, each word carrying the weight of an irrevocable sentence. "Take only what you brought when you arrived, nothing more, nothing less." The realization of complete downfall hit Vanessa like a physical blow. Her world, carefully built upon lies and manipulations, was crumbling before her eyes in a matter of minutes. All the jewelry, designer clothes, unlimited credit cards, everything she valued and had married for, would be lost. And Tyler, her supposed accomplice and lover, had been exposed not only as Richard's betrayer, but also as someone who planned to betray her equally. The look she cast at the driver contained all the hatred and contempt that a betrayed woman can manifest. Her breathing became erratic, almost panting as she fully comprehended the consequences of her actions. Richard's family members, who had always treated her with respect and generosity, now observed her with a mixture of repulsion and pity, perhaps the latter feeling being the most unbearable for her wounded pride. "You can't do this to me! I have rights!" she shouted, in a last desperate attempt to regain some control over the situation. "My lawyer will destroy all of you in the divorce." The tension in the mansion's hall reached its peak. All present observed the final confrontation between Richard and Vanessa like spectators of a Greek tragedy, knowing they were witnessing the complete collapse of a farce elaborated for years. Eleanor, Martha, and Jake remained discreetly distant, their mission accomplished, the truth finally revealed. Tyler, restrained by Richard's cousins, had abandoned any pretense of dignity, his face contorted in an expression of growing panic as he realized there would be no easy escape for his actions. At the center of this emotional storm, Richard remained firm as a rock, his pain transparent but contained by the moral strength that had always characterized him. When he spoke again, his voice was low but carried an indisputable authority that silenced even Vanessa's hysterical sobs. "The prenuptial agreement we signed is very clear," Richard responded with devastating calm. "Proven infidelity results in total loss of rights to my assets. Your lawyer will receive a copy of the recording, as will the authorities, should you decide to contest." The reality of the situation finally tamed Vanessa's hysteria. Like a balloon slowly deflating, her arrogant posture gave way to an almost pathetic figure. The perfect makeup, now stained by tears of anger and frustration, created a grotesque effect on her once dazzling face. The jewels that adorned her body, gifts from Richard over the years, now seemed to weigh tons, physical symbols of the betrayal she had planned. With a mechanical gesture, almost like an automaton, she began to remove earrings, necklaces, and bracelets, letting them fall on the side table like pieces of a game she had definitely lost. Each metallic clink of jewelry falling on the marble echoed in the silence like a small epitaph for her destroyed ambitions. "This doesn't end here," muttered Vanessa, more to herself than to those present, as she slowly headed for the main staircase, presumably to collect her personal belongings. "Nobody humiliates me like this and gets away with it." The garden of Montemar Mansion gleamed under the mild afternoon sun. A month had passed since the fateful night of revelation, and nature seemed to celebrate restored justice with an explosion of colors and fragrances. The rose bushes, now in full bloom, displayed their petals in vibrant shades of red, pink, and white, creating a perfect contrast with the lush green of the meticulously trimmed grass. Amid this scene of renewal, Eleanor walked slowly, her steps cautious but firm, admiring the plants she had once cared for with such affection. Dressed with simplicity but dignity, in a light blue outfit that enhanced the serenity in her gaze, she seemed lighter, as if a great weight had been removed from her shoulders. At her side, Richard accompanied her with respect evident in every gesture. The businessman, despite the pain of recent betrayal, demonstrated an inner peace that surprised everyone who knew him. His posture remained elegant, but there was something new in his countenance, a wisdom acquired through suffering, a gratitude for truth, however painful it might be. "Your courage saved not only my fortune but my dignity," commented Richard, stopping before a marble bench strategically positioned under the shade of a century-old jabuticaba tree. "Few would have the integrity to face what you faced for someone who unjustly doubted your honesty." The marble bench welcomed them both as the conversation continued, Richard revealing the legal and personal developments of the last few weeks. His calm gestures complemented his measured words, as usual. But now, there was a genuine warmth in his voice that transcended the traditional courtesy of an employer. Investigations after the incident revealed that Vanessa had attempted to access Richard's bank accounts just hours after the confrontation, but the banker, already alerted by the businessman himself about the events, had blocked any transaction. Tyler, in turn, had managed to escape that same night, taking with him only the money from the joint account that Vanessa maintained with her husband. An insignificant amount compared to the fortune they intended to steal, but enough to allow his temporary disappearance. The gentle breeze lightly stirred Eleanor's grey hair as she listened, her eyes reflecting understanding and, surprisingly, compassion. "The divorce has already been finalized. She will receive nothing, as the prenuptial agreement we signed provided for total loss of rights in case of proven infidelity," explained Richard, his voice firm but without traces of revenge or resentment. "My lawyer said he has never seen such a quick process. The evidence was irrefutable." Eleanor lowered her eyes, a shadow of guilt crossing her wrinkled face. Hands calloused from decades of hard work rested on her lap, fingers intertwined in a gesture that revealed her discomfort. Despite the justice achieved, something still troubled her. The feeling that perhaps she could have prevented so much suffering if she had found the courage to speak earlier. The moments of silence she had witnessed, the small clues she had ignored out of fear of losing her job, all now weighed on her conscience with painful clarity. When she finally found the voice to express her regret, the words came out broken by genuine emotion. "I should have spoken when I first saw. Perhaps I would have spared you so much pain," Eleanor began, her voice almost a whisper. "Fear silenced me, when truth should have been my only—" Richard gently raised his hand, interrupting Eleanor's words of self-censure. His gesture contained no authority or impatience, only deep understanding and forgiveness. The eyes that had seen so many difficult negotiations, so many complicated corporate decisions, now conveyed a wisdom that transcended the business world, the wisdom of one who finally understands the true value of loyalty and honesty. The sun, beginning its descent on the horizon, bathed the gardens in a golden light that seemed to underline the importance of that moment of reconciliation and new beginnings. "You risked everything for the truth. That is priceless," Richard affirmed with quiet conviction. "Many in your position would have simply moved on, leaving me at the mercy of those who planned my ruin. Your courage gave me a second chance to live with open eyes." Several months passed, bringing with them the transformations of the season and profound changes in the lives of all involved in that story of betrayal and redemption. The gardens of Montemar Mansion, now prepared to receive the summer heat, served as the setting for a small, intimate celebration. Under a gazebo elegantly decorated with fresh flowers and soft lights, a select group gathered around a polished oak table. Richard occupied the head of the table, but his posture was not that of a distant host. On the contrary, he actively participated in conversations, his face showing a serenity that many had not seen in years. Eleanor was at his right, dressed with discreet elegance that reflected her natural dignity. Martha and Jake completed the group, their faces relaxed and smiling, free from the tension that had accompanied them during the days of the conspiracy. "Today we celebrate not only the past, but mainly the future," announced Richard, rising with a small box in his hands. "Eleanor, your integrity illuminated one of the darkest moments of my life. This gift is not just a thank you, but a recognition of what you represent." Eleanor's eyes widened in surprise when Richard opened the small box, revealing not jewelry or money, but a set of gleaming keys and officially sealed documents. With hands trembling more from emotion than age, she received the gift, unable to articulate words in the face of unexpected generosity. The documents, carefully organized and legally incontestable, transferred to her name a comfortable house in the best residential neighborhood of the city, along with financial guarantees that would ensure her well-being for the rest of her life. Silent tears flowed down her wrinkled face as she processed the meaning of that gesture. Not just material security, but validation of a life dedicated to honesty and dignified work. "The deed is in your name, along with a lifetime pension that will ensure you never have to work again," Richard explained, his voice heavy with sincere emotion. "It's the least I can do for someone who saved not only my fortune, but my faith in humanity." Martha and Jake also received recognition for their loyalty and courage. To the former cook, Richard offered the position of manager of his rural properties, with a generous salary and a house on the main farm. Jake, in turn, was promoted to head of company security, a position that reflected the absolute trust placed in him after his crucial participation in revealing the truth. The celebration continued with a delicious meal and lively conversations, as if the universe was finally rewarding those who had remained faithful to their principles despite difficulties. At the end of the afternoon, when guests began to say goodbye, the predominant feeling wasn't triumph over wrongdoers, but gratitude for the opportunity to rebuild. "Life has a strange way of balancing things, doesn't it?" Martha commented, while helping Eleanor collect the gifts received. "Who would have thought that after so much suffering, we would find peace and justice?" While the Montemar Mansion celebrated new beginnings, in a distant and decaying part of the city, reality showed itself drastically different. A small studio apartment with peeling walls and mold in the corners now served as Vanessa's residence. The tiny space, with a single bed, a two-burner stove and a precarious bathroom, contrasted violently with the luxury she had been accustomed to. Kneeling on the dirty floor, she scrubbed the surface with a worn brush, her once perfectly manicured fingers now rough and reddened from constant contact with cheap chemicals. The elegant dress and expensive jewelry had been replaced by simple, worn clothes, her only accessory being a cheap plastic watch that mercilessly marked the hours of hard work. "I finished the cleaning, ma'am," Vanessa announced, rising with difficulty, her back aching from prolonged effort. Her beauty was still evident, but there was something broken in her gaze, a mixture of contained anger and bitter resignation. The owner of the apartment that Vanessa had just cleaned was a middle-aged woman with ostentatious jewelry and heavy makeup. She inspected the work with a critical eye, deliberately looking for flaws to justify reduced payment. Her behavior exuded that particular type of cruelty that often accompanies newly acquired power over someone who once occupied a superior position. With a smile of malicious satisfaction, she removed from her purse a few coins, less than half the agreed amount, and deposited them in Vanessa's outstretched hand with a gesture that seemed more like alms than payment for services rendered. "It's all I can pay today," the woman declared with evident disdain, "and next time clean better behind the toilet. I'm not paying for half-done work." Alone again in her miserable studio apartment, Vanessa let herself fall onto the only chair in the apartment, an unstable piece of furniture with torn upholstery that she had found abandoned on the sidewalk. The coins she had received would barely pay for a decent meal, let alone the rent due in a few days. Her gaze wandered across the cramped space until it fixed on the small dresser where she kept her few belongings. With slow movements, she opened the top drawer and removed a photograph torn in half, the only memento she kept from her previous life. In the partially destroyed image, Tyler's smiling face looked at the camera, unaware of the fate that awaited them. Vanessa ran her fingers over the worn surface of the paper, her face a complex mask of contradictory emotions. "You betrayed me in the end too, didn't you?" she murmured to the photograph, as if she could extract some late confession from the silent image. "At least I'm paying for my mistakes here, and have you found your next victim yet?" News about Tyler reached Vanessa through sparse gossip and occasional comments. According to information from a former colleague from the mansion who had encountered her by chance, the driver had been seen in another country, accompanying a visibly wealthy middle-aged woman, wearing expensive clothes and sporting a luxury watch. The pattern was repeating itself, but this time Vanessa was on the other side of the equation, no longer the accomplice, but the abandoned victim. The irony of the situation did not escape her keen perception, just as the harshness of the lesson life was imposing on her did not escape it. The mandatory community service, part of her sentence for fraud and attempted theft, occupied her mornings, while afternoons were dedicated to house cleaning to survive. Nights were spent in sterile regret and revenge plans that she knew were impossible to execute. "One day I'll be back on top," she promised herself, although the conviction in her voice diminished with each passing day. "One day everyone will regret having humiliated me like this." The contrast between destinies couldn't be more evident when the scene shifts to a quiet neighborhood in the residential areas of the city. A two-story house, modest but welcoming, with a well-kept garden and large windows that allowed generous entry of natural light. Inside, spaces decorated with elegant simplicity created an atmosphere of peace and warmth. What stood out most, however, was the constant movement of elderly people coming and going, some with walking aids, others in wheelchairs, all greeted with warm smiles and individualized attention. In the main room, adapted with round tables and comfortable chairs, one group played dominoes while another participated in a crafts workshop. Soft music filled the environment, complementing the cheerful buzz of conversations and laughter. "Welcome to our little refuge, Mr. Richard," said Eleanor, leading the visitor through the main corridor of her new home. "We started with just 3 elderly people from the neighborhood who had nowhere to spend the day. Now we're almost 20. Richard observed every detail with genuine admiration. The house he had offered Eleanor as a reward for her loyalty had been transformed into something far beyond a simple residence. Using part of the lifetime pension she had received, she had created a community center for needy elderly people, offering not only recreational activities, but also nutritious meals, basic health monitoring, and mainly dignity and companionship for those often forgotten by society. Each room reflected the meticulous care and attention to detail that had always characterized her work, now directed toward an even nobler purpose. "You transformed your pain into help for others," commented Richard, visibly moved by what he witnessed. "When many would have used this opportunity only for rest and personal comfort, you chose to multiply the good you received." The afternoon advanced as the 2 old friends headed to the back porch, a quiet space overlooking a small garden where medicinal plants grew in organized beds. The aroma of lemon balm, mint, and rosemary hung in the air, bringing memories of the infusions Eleanor prepared in the mansion to calm Richard's nerves after stressful workdays. A rustic wooden table, inherited from Eleanor's mother, had been carefully restored and strategically placed to capture the best view of the sunset. On it, 2 cups of steaming tea waited, inviting a moment of reflection and sincere conversation. The singing of birds returning to their nests composed the soundtrack of that precious moment, mixing with the distant sound of laughter from the elderly who still remained in the community center activities. In the distance, the mountains gained golden contours as the sunset began to paint the horizon with shades of orange and pink, creating a perfect setting for the closure of that journey of redemption. A gentle breeze stirred Eleanor's grey hair, which she brushed away from her face with a serenity that only comes after overcoming storms. "You know, Richard," she commented while adjusting a small cushion behind her back, "when I was in that rain, expelled from the mansion, I felt that my world had ended. I believed my dignity was lost forever." Sitting side by side in rocking chairs that emitted a comforting creak, Richard and Eleanor silently contemplated the natural spectacle, each absorbed in their own thoughts about the winding paths that had brought them there. Eleanor's hands, marked by time and work, held her cup with the delicacy of someone who had learned to value the small pleasures of life. Richard, in turn, seemed more relaxed than he had ever been in the mansion, the lines of worry on his face softened by the peace of that shared moment. "And what about you, Richard? Do you still miss your life before?" asked Eleanor, her wise eyes seeking those of her friend with genuine interest. Richard smiled slightly, taking a sip of chamomile tea before answering. "The mansion now seems empty, and excessively large for a man alone. I've been thinking of converting it into a foundation for young talents without resources, to give a greater purpose to those walls that have witnessed so much." An orange butterfly momentarily landed on the railing of the veranda, its vibrant wings capturing the last rays of sunlight before taking flight again, a small symbol of transformation that went unnoticed by neither of them. "True wealth isn't in mansions or bank accounts, Richard," Eleanor finally said, her serene face illuminated by the last rays of sun. "It's in sleeping with a clear conscience and waking up with gratitude." The businessman nodded slowly, recognizing the profound wisdom in Eleanor's simple words. A discreet tear formed in the corner of his eye, not of sadness, but of a deep understanding that only comes when one loses something to find something more valuable. Together, they shared tea while watching the sun disappear on the horizon, their silhouettes cut against the colorful sky as silent witnesses to the triumph of integrity over betrayal, truth over lies, justice that, although sometimes late, finally prevailed. "To truth and new beginnings," Richard toasted, raising his cup in a solemn gesture that celebrated not only the overcome past, but mainly the future that opened before them. A future built on foundations of honesty, respect, and recovered dignity. If Eleanor and Richard's story moved you, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment where you're from. And don't go anywhere. The next story is already appearing on screen, made especially for you. See you soon.